So, ladies and gentlemen, this is really a huge privilege we have all together to have such a personality like Andy Palmer. To try to give you some insights of his career, I did some research. I talked to him also because obviously I cannot know everything about him. And I hope by saying some following facts, maybe you will go into the deepness of this personality. He is a veteran of the industry. There is no discussion. He was going the ranks of the companies till the end, till the top. He was working for Nissan Corporation long before Louis Schweitzer, because it's Louis Schweitzer, to be very clear. Again, he can tell you even more, decided to take over Nissan after Louis Schweitzer decided to take over Dacia. And when we're coming to the Q&A, I will ask him what is his opinion about which was the best for Renault Group, to take over Dacia or Nissan. You will see what is his answer. So he was there when Carlos Ghosn was deployed. He was working for 25 years and he was going up to the rankings till the position of Chief Operating Officer, number 2 in the company, obviously below Carlos Ghosn. I can tell you when I met him personally, we become instantly friends. If I'm lying, you can say, Dan, don't lie, don't bullshit the people. We become instantly friends by saying the following. He was giving me his business card. I was looking at the business card and it was everything on there. And I said, but Andy, excepting financial department and design, you are running all the business of Nissan Corporation. He was even the chairman of Infinity, correct? And it's a fact. In Nissan, he was the father of many cars, starting with Nissan Leaf. And I'm saying this because in the media, worldwide media, even back then, everybody was informed that Leaf is the baby of Carlos Ghosn, which is simply bullshit. It's not true. But he was the father who initiated the Qashqai program for cars. He did several other cars, and then he left the company. Obviously, today, of course, we know everything about Carlos Ghosn, so we all understand why he left the company. Back then was a kind of courage, and after he left the Nissan Corporation, he became, as you all know, the CEO of Aston Martin. In Aston Martin, he did also several cars. For instance, the DBX, which is the cash cow, the #1 sold Aston Martin model was conceived. Even the Vanquish, Valkyrie. He's a person who did so many things in his career, and he is a proud member of the Man Best Hall of Fame, which is, as you probably all know, the Hall of Fame for the best managers of the car industry. So all of them are legends. He was quite young when he became, but in this legendary Hall of Fame, for instance, you can find, because it's once in a lifetime, so it's not every year, it's not like a world championship, every year someone's who will win. No, it's when you become, you are a Hall of Famer. So next to Andy, for instance, you find Luca De Meo, you find Olivier Francois, you find Alfredo Altavilla, you find Denis Levotte. This year will be inducted on June 12th in Vienna, Arnaud Belloni. You find Carlos Tavares. You find the first one in the history, which was 24 years ago, was Ferdinand Piech. And the second one, funny enough, was Louis Schweitzer. Funny story, because he told me when we met together in Rotterdam, and he was participating the last years to the Autobest Gala because he believed in this project. Again, he will tell you more, if he wants, about how he discovered. And always he told me that in my professional CV, The man best is always mentioned because I'm very proud to be a member of this. And I remember even Carlos Tavares told me, and there is here people who saw the interview because it's video, he said, I'm proud to be a member of this Hall of Fame, by the way, and he was already a Hall of Famer back then when Carlos...
One time I beat him.
He said, Tavares, some of them are my role models in life. Such a compliment coming from Carlos Tavares back then, it's huge. Obviously today when we all know what happened with Tavares, you know, we can discuss for the good or the bad, but back then was like that. So Andy was from early, was one of the youngest members inducted in the, together with Luca De Meo, more recently with the famous Croatian guy. I would say if you look to his career, he did almost everything in terms of propulsions, from pure electric cars to the most ICE cars, if you may say. He was always, he's an engineer, by the way, nobody's perfect like myself. He was always captivated by mechanical, exceptional things. That's a very important reason why he loves watches, like myself. And anyway, it's not the subject, the topic of tonight, but I want to confirm officially, you are the very first to know in the world that Andy is the newest member of the Temporis International Awards jury. Again, it's not for Romania, unfortunately, it's for the global, for the whole planet, but if Romania is a part of the global, it should be Romania included. And by coincidence, the founder of this international awards is a Romanian. I'm sorry for that guy. It's a pity that he's a Romanian. Probably if he was a Bulgarian, it was much better for Romanians, you know? Yeah, it's a Bulgarian, smart guy, he's a Romanian. But again, it doesn't matter too much today. And by the way, even I talked to him today, even the CEO of Formula One Electric, Jeff Dodds, which is a good friend of us, is a member of this jury, next to the biggest legends of the watch industry. So he is now having a debut in also other industries. The most important point to me inviting him was not only the experience, not only what he did. The point was that he is a free man. He can share with us everything we want to know. Why? Because he's not anymore a top executive. He's not anymore a CEO of a company. Because as we all know, and his nice word is, if I am a CEO, I have a PR in my head. Because obviously, if you are the CEO, no matter who you are, obviously you have to be careful what kind of statements are you delivering. He is having no barriers, no frontiers. And you all remember that was a concept I decided some years ago, which is probably the most difficult concept I ever did. To my knowledge, there are not so many on this planet who can try this, to find this kind of personalities with such a huge experience and expertise being free to talk. Imagine that, for instance, my dream is to invite Bernie Ecclestone. Why? Because now he can talk. Although he's too old, I don't know if he will travel anymore, he can tell me. Being said that, let's go into some details. And I will ask you to clarify, because there are so many people here, I know half of the questions. What is going on and what happened with Nissan Corporation to be in such a bad shape, to be in love with Honda and then to be disgraced by Honda, finally to change the CEO, which you know very well, by the way. Tell us a bit more about this, how I can call it, you can name it, how strange or how impossible it is.
First of all, good evening, everybody. It's a real honour to be here in your beautiful country and to be asked to come and speak a little bit about what I would call my industry. please feel free to ask any question you like, and I'll do my best to answer in as honest way as I can. It'll always be honest. Whether it's right, you can decide. Nissan. It's hard to plot the history of Nissan. I think it's very telling that this evening we saw awards going to many different brands, but none to Nissan. In many respects, Nissan has, I think, lost the plot when it comes to product. And a car industry, a car company is built first and foremost on good products. It's certainly true that when I left the company and I was responsible predominantly for product planning, the average life cycle of the car, the average age of the car, I think was 3.4 years at any point in time. And we used to manage that very precisely, 3.4, 3.5, 3.6. Today I think it's over 7 years. The customer is very discerning, and the customer will decide whether you're relevant or not. And I think the reality is that the Nissan is no longer relevant from a product point of view. It's no longer anywhere in the US with hybrids. It's not anywhere in China with BEV. And it's not making cars that live up to the brand. Brand was always about innovation that excites, and it's neither innovative or exciting anymore. So it's lost a connection. That is, in my humble opinion, not just down to the coup d'etat that happened with Carlos Ghosn. I think it was already a rot that was existing before that. I can say from my perspective that I was the third in a line of at least two very innovative product planners. Patrick Palata, you remember him, he became the COO of Renault. Very difficult guy to get along with, but really innovative in his approach. And I can say, whilst I might say that I sowed the seeds of Qashqai, it was actually Patrick Palata that grew those seeds. He was succeeded by Carlos Tavares, a very difficult guy. But you know that, and you know that he created Stellantis from very difficult beginnings and created some amazing cars. I succeeded Carlos Tavares. I'm probably also a very difficult guy. But after that, you probably struggle to think about who was leading the products. And the reality was that Ghosn went from a protector of innovation, a supporter, where he acknowledged he wasn't the expert, but he protected Carlos Tavares, he protected Patrick Palata, he protected me. He allowed cars like the Nissan Leaf to happen. After that, he wasn't there anymore. He was in Renault, or he was in the US, or he was meeting with presidents of various countries, and he lost the connection with the company, and he allowed basically, I hope there's no accountants here, but he allowed the accountants to rule. And they stopped spending money, and they stopped innovating, and they ended up with a lousy product set, and the customer voted with its feet. If you think about my very last executive committee at Nissan was in July 2014. I went to that committee with the third EV. So we'd already launched Leaf, we'd already launched ENV200, the van, and the third in the line was an Infiniti. And the plan was, this is 2014, the plan was Infiniti would become an EV brand. Everything would get converted to EV, and this is the first car. By that time, there was very clearly two tribes inside Nissan. Tribe 1 was winning, which was EVs is the right direction. Tribe 2 was we lose money on this, and we can't meet our quarterly targets, and we can't get our bonuses. And at that meeting, I didn't win convincingly, so there was a postponement to the decision on Infinity moving to be an EV brand. In between that meeting and the next executive committee meeting in September of 2014, 2000 and wasn't 2014. 2014? It was 2014. Sorry. I left. And at the September EC, the Infinity program was cancelled. It was also then from there the Sakura program was cancelled, which was a K car. The Delta Wing inspired Blade Glider was cancelled. Eventually the EMV 200 made in Barcelona was cancelled. The Leaf wasn't replaced. And as you know, for a period of time, Nissan didn't have any EVs. Look at the value of Tesla today in the premium space, and imagine what Infinity, even if it had a small part of that, what Infinity could have been. But it didn't anymore have the support. It didn't anymore have the cover to allow those innovations to exist. And Nissan basically withdrew from that. Infinity is an all but dead brand now, and it didn't have the replacement to Leaf. You no longer, when you talk about battery electric cars, you're going to think about Tesla, or you're going to think about BYD or MG or Geely. You don't automatically think of Nissan. But if you go back 10 years, you would have said BEV, Nissan. And that was lost. So I think it was a very long way of answering your question, Dan, but I think you cannot have a successful car company that doesn't have a great lineup of cars. And Nissan doesn't have a great lineup of cars. And if Ivan Espinosa, who I discovered as a product planner in Mexico, the one hope I have is Ivan, because he does understand the importance of cars. I just hope it's not too late.
And let's tell the people that Ivan is the new CEO of Nissan, who was following the dismissal of Uchida. Just to let you know who is Ivan.
That's absolutely correct. As I say, he's a young guy. I discovered him as a really inspired product planner in Mexico. We brought him from Mexico over to Japan. He's grown up in the company. I know he knows product. I just hope it's not too late. To the Honda discussion. Nissan is a company that is very proud. I don't know if you know what Nissan stands for, but it's basically Japanese industries. So it's representative of the pride of Japan. Nissan, the Japanese, as you know, are very, very pride-driven people. You can't lose your face in a Japanese society. They don't play together with other people very well. So it was a bad day when the alliance happened. But Carlos Ghosn was smart enough to recognize that you don't take over a Japanese company. You have to collaborate. You have to create an alliance of equals. And he was inspired in that insofar as the Japanese didn't lose their face in that alliance. I can tell you that Nissan, I was there, Nissan was on its knees when the alliance happened. It was weeks from going bankrupt, and the Japanese government wasn't stepping in. Within a year, and to some extent I put the credit with Louis Schweitzer and with Mr. Hanawa, the then Japanese CEO, in terms of that turnaround, but Carlos Ghosn came in as the COO at that time. And together they turned the company around, and within a year Nissan was looking healthy. It was an inspired turnaround. After about 1 year, I can tell you that the Japanese old guard, the old boys, started saying this alliance isn't good. Nissan is the bigger partner, Nissan deserves a bigger share. We have to destroy it. And they started talking about what they called the nuclear button, the means of escaping from the alliance. Even back then. And so what you saw on the outside of the alliance was a lot of talk about synergies, about the way the two companies work together. I know there are some people in the room that are from Renault. You'll know on the inside it wasn't half as comfortable. There was bickering. I can tell you that we developed the Nissan Leaf almost in parallel with the Renault Zoe. Brand new technologies, the one opportunity to have a shared platform. Do you know how many parts there are on that program which are common?
None.
One electrical connector. That's it. And that was I think a descriptor of the problem, that on the surface you could talk about synergistic relationships, but in reality nobody could agree that it was acceptable to use a Renault technology on a Nissan or a Nissan technology on a Renault. Ghosn was very much of the opinion that you always needed a win-win, which meant that you could never get a win-win, so you never had anything. So there was a real lack of synergistic products. Clearly, you know that the French government was pushing Ghosn a lot to integrate. The great belief was, you know, Mr. Ghosn, you're not getting any younger. Before you leave the company, you have to integrate. The Japanese were very aware of that. They were very aware that he was getting instructions to merge the companies, and of course, they made that great coup d'etat. Now, whether Ghosn was acting illegally or immorally, I don't know, I can't say, but there was a coup d'etat which blew up the relationship, and the old guard were very successful. But Nissan is like a piece of elastic. It had been stretched for the years in the alliance, but as soon as the alliance was gone, it returned to what it was, which is a very inward-looking, Japanese-orientated company, and it started very quickly to lose its way, as we could very visibly see. Again, MITI, which is the Ministry of Industry in Japan, sees that problem. It can't afford a second failure of Nissan, and so it moves basically to try to bring Honda and Nissan together. It recognizes that the Japanese are a long way behind when it comes to electrification, and it tries to advance that by bringing the two together. But again, Nissan is a very proud company, and the idea that a management team that is educated at Tokyo University or Waseda University could be controlled by the farmers at Honda, because that's how they see them, was unacceptable. And so they broke it. It was Uchida couldn't accept the fact that Honda is a much more powerful company, and couldn't accept to be a brand of, and therefore you saw the resistance. Ultimately, that might come back. Ivan is a much more practical man. He might see the saviour being in the hands of Honda, but that remains to be seen. Something has to happen. Something has to happen, otherwise Nissan is gone.
But Andy, if it's not Honda, what could be the savior, if there is anyone, in your opinion, for Nissan?
Andy, do they have the resources for a revival? This is the question.
They don't. They don't, because as you know, a new platform is typically over $1 billion, and you don't have the platform to do that. So you're going to have to find an innovative way of doing it. I think you can go in four different directions. Direction one is an association with a technology partner, whether that's Tennyson or one of the others. But you could imagine that Nissan could accept a collaboration with a technology partner, an Apple or a Google or something like that. One possibility. Second possibility is that the merger with Honda comes back on the table. But I fear that Nissan would become a brand of Honda in that case, and that's a big face. There's no face saving to that, so difficult for them to accept. The third is even more difficult and probably the most likely, which is one of the Chinese companies takes over Nissan, and you can imagine how that would go. But in our industry today, if you take emotion out of it, then the most powerful companies are really the Chinese, and you could see why they might want to reach out for the manufacturing technology of Nissan. So practically this is the best one, but it's also the most difficult one to accept. And the last one is not the most improbable, but because sometimes, as you know, suicide is better than being taken prisoner, then you can have bankruptcy. These, I think, are the four routes. None of them are palatable, and none of them involve Nissan recovering by itself.
Isn't it true that it's too big to fail?
I think it is, which is why MITI stepped in and said the only palatable alternative from their point of view is to be part of a group. And you see this a lot in Japan. If you think about most of the brands in Japan, they're under the umbrella of Toyota. You know, Isuzu had a problem, Hino had a problem, Subaru has a problem, and they all fall under the broader umbrella of Toyota. And that's the face-saving answer. I don't think it's the best answer. I don't think it's a Western answer, but it is an answer. So I think the probable only acceptable alternative to the Japanese is probably the Honda solution.
Okay, before go to the next topic, I want to say one thing about METI, because probably the people doesn't know. METI is M-E-T-I, correct? Yes, is the biggest ministry in Japan. They hired more than 11,000 people, the size of European Commission, and they decide absolutely everything in the old Japanese rules. So in Japan, if the METI says something, you have to follow, even if you are a private company, correct? So it's a very specific situation, and this is giving me an opportunity to ask his questions, because I love it. He's in real estate, he doesn't work in our industry, but he said, I want to come, he's a member of the Caesar Club, one of the other things that I'm doing, and he said, I want to come to talk to Andy one very important question. It's obvious that he has experience in dealing with some of the toughest governments, like Japan government, like the UK government. We'll come back on Aston Martin, obviously. And he said to me, I want to learn from this guy how he managed the relation with politicians, with such tough governments, to make them, to help the whole economical process of the companies and not to interfere in a bad way, which is, as we all know, our case in most of the situations.
I don't have an easy answer to your question, but I think you have to, as in life, every government is different, so there's no set rule. You have to approach each government with a somewhat different approach. You'd approach a British government in a more assertive manner than you would a Japanese government, for example. But I think the point that is common amongst all of them, I have a philosophy, which is you never go to a negotiating table that you're not prepared to walk away from. So I think normally when you go to governments, you're talking about lobbying for a legislation or not a legislation. A lot of lobbying going on in Europe at the moment around the EV mandates. You're going with the offer to build a car or not build a car, to put a battery factory or not put a battery factory, to employ people or not employ people. And I think it's true in almost every case that basically, whilst you will deliver that message in a subtly different way to each government, the answer is always the same, which is we employ a lot of people. In Sunderland, we employ 7,000 people. If you're not prepared to collaborate with us, we'll walk away. One of the difficulties that I have, for example, in the UK right now, is the discussion around the EV mandate. This is the mandate by which the percentage of EVs increments each year. And the car companies are basically threatening to close the factories. You have in the UK a government, it's a left of centre, that hasn't governed for 14 years. They have no experience of dealing with car companies, and they can't tell the difference between a bluff and a real play. And so one of the very difficulties that I have in advising the Labour government is don't get suckered in by the bluff. Because all car companies will threaten you with thousands of redundancies, whether they mean it or not. And so, you know, I would do the same. In Nissan, I would have taken the same approach. So I think that the point is that you go to the negotiating table with the strongest offer that basically the government can't refuse. If they refuse, they're going to lose a lot of jobs. And in my world at least, you don't bluff, but you treat a Japanese government different to a British government, different probably to a Romanian government, probably certainly different to a US government.
In many cases, for example, let's suppose that the governments give you the same offer. How you choose a country for an investment? Based on the state aid, based on the quality of the people?
I would say that you never, no, it's a bit controversial, but I would say that I built 24 car factories during my career. I don't believe that I've ever selected one based on only the state aid. So state aid represents part of the economic argument, but you have to balance every decision, I believe, across the metrics of quality, cost and delivery. So, for example, in Europe, one of the advantages that the UK had compared with Spain is English language, trained workforce and English law. Whilst that is not enough by itself to decide you go to Sunderland and not to Spain, it does mean that the UK probably never offered the same amount of money that perhaps Spain might have done. But unless it was very compelling, you play that balance of quality, cost and delivery. I would say in the case of Nissan put a lot of emphasis on quality. Other companies that I work for might put more emphasis on cost, but it's never a one-stop answer. It's always a blended, and probably the most controversial. You can imagine you go to a board meeting and you have a set of criteria and you have scoring and you come to a number. At the end, it's the individuals around the table that feel good or not about a decision. When we built the battery factory for the Leaf, it was a very strong competition eventually between Portugal and Sunderland. There was slightly more money on the table in Portugal. Sunderland won, predominantly because we had more experience of building cars in the UK than we had in Portugal.
Galei?
Yeah. Andy, first of all, thank you very much for coming here and sharing with us your experience and knowledge.
My pleasure.
I will put the question, but at the end, because first of all, I will try to make a short incursion in history. 50 years ago, the Japanese car manufacturers have landed in the United States. If I'm not wrong, it was a complete failure. Of course, I think they had drawn the lessons and they came back. The second time was, in fact, by far more successful, and we can see the results today. The difference with Europe, it's very big, because it seems to me that most of the Japanese car manufacturers, excepting Toyota, were not so successful in Europe. More than that, Mitsubishi is stepping back, Nissan, you can see, Honda, it's so and so. It's clear Toyota can be considered very successful. Okay, now, I'm looking back only 35 years ago, and I remember the debut of the South Korean industry. I remember very well the products of Hyundai. Poor quality, they were built under license with Mitsubishi, but very poor quality. It took them roughly 20-25 years to reach the best European level. And now, they are both Hyundai and Kia, they are products of very good quality. Now I'm going in the same direction, looking at the Chinese industry. How long did it take to reach the level of today? You may say, you may know better than me, 10, 15 years? Okay. They are by far much more aggressive than the Japanese have been and the South Koreans. 2 years ago, here in Romania and probably in most countries of Europe, we are not speaking about Chinese cars. This year we have been in Paris with Dan at the Paris Motor Show. The Chinese were everywhere. A lot of products, a lot of brands. Of course, I'm not sure all of them will survive. But what I want to say, my observation, and I want to know your opinion. It looks to me that the main existential threat in Europe brought by the Chinese is for the generalistic manufacturers like Fiat, Peugeot, Citroën, Opel, Renault. Okay, no, Renault is here in the room. And they are our friends because they had built a successful project in Romania. No, but really this is my impression that they are really threatened. I want to know which is your opinion. How do you foresee this? Which is your forecast?
The Chinese are scary as hell. They really are. I have no criticism of the Chinese. Don't misunderstand me. I think what they're doing is phenomenal. If you think about the Japanese growth when it became successful was built around a generational change of consumer behavior. A generational change was basically the smaller engines, more fuel economy. It was during the oil crisis. Mm-hmm. And the Japanese had got small engines, small cars, and the Americans and Europeans didn't. And when the Japanese came, they came with the new technology, with fuel-efficient vehicles, and they created their market share. We have the same generational change now. It's called EV, doesn't really matter, but it's the same generational change. Same crisis, it's not a fuel crisis, it's a CO2 crisis. And when you have generational changes, the old rules don't matter, the old investment don't matter, it's all about the new investment. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the Chinese. In 1992, the central government decided that the car industry to China was very important, but you couldn't beat the rest of the world in internal combustion engines. So you had to move to something that they named new energy vehicles. And in 1992, they weren't quite sure what new energy vehicle meant. They weren't sure whether that was a hybrid, or whether that was a plug-in hybrid, or it was a hydrogen, or quite what it was. But they started working with Western manufacturers, because between 1992 and, to my knowledge, 2002, they were making domestically pretty lousy vehicles. Now, I joined the board of Dongfeng. Dongfeng is a state-owned car company, and it had a joint venture with Nissan and with Honda and with Peugeot Citroën. At that time, I remember walking down the line of their light commercial vehicle build track, and putting a tape measure across the chassis of one of their trucks, and finding there was 2 inches difference between the width of the front and the width of the back. They were dreadful dreadful vehicles. But they were smart enough in 2002 to say, we want to work with Nissan, we want to take your vehicles, we want to learn how to make trucks, how to make cars. By the way, we hear that you're working on some interesting hybrids. How about transfer of technology? And they invented this concept of the 50-50 joint venture. And to us, it looked like a gift, because China was an emerging market with huge volume, huge profits per vehicle. Profit per vehicle in China was twice what you could get in the US. It really was Treasure Island. And as an industry, we saw the money. What we didn't see was the existential threat. And so between 2002, where I would say the Chinese government had started to solidify what new energy vehicle meant. They were still dithering whether it was plug-in hybrid or whether it was BEV, but they were starting to solidify what they meant. They then started to insist, Nissan, you have to introduce a Chinese branded vehicle based upon your car. Guess what they chose? They chose the Nissan Leaf. So they imported the technology, they learned about the technology. From 2002 to today, they didn't just copy the technology, they started the development. They bought, for example, the company that I established, which is the joint venture between Nissan and NEC, called AESC. They bought that company, created Envision. They started to invest in the technology. They started to believe that they could lead in EV technology and in AI technology. And they started to define vehicles which were significantly ahead of what the West was doing. If you go to Shanghai or Beijing now, you won't see hardly any Western car brands on the road. They're all BYDs and MGs and Geelys. And they won that by merit. Now, in the same way that the Japanese recognized an opportunity to globalize because of the changing world, because CO2 is a real problem, what you're seeing now is simply the Chinese taking advantage. My fear is that the instinctive reaction of politicians and our car industry, probably some of you in the room, is one of protectionism. We put up the tariff wall. And my concern is that the tariff, it's okay if it's very short term. It's okay if you say you put the patient into intensive care.
It is in place already.
Well, it is, now it is, and you see it getting worse and worse under President Trump. It's okay if it's 1 year or 2 years, and you allow the patient to recover and you spend to put it right. But what I fear is generally what I see with tariff is that the patient becomes complacent. Our industry is safe. And at the same time, the Chinese are going full whack with battery technology, with AI, with autonomous driving. And if our indigenous companies aren't experiencing that, if they're in denial that the Chinese cars are crap, that they're not real technology, if they don't go and drive them, they won't know how good they are. When the tariff barrier comes down or the consumer decides that they want to buy those cars, we're left with technology that is out of date. So I can say that my advice to, for example, the UK government, whether they listen or not is a different discussion, but my advice is do not put in place EU tariff. Let the Chinese come. Let Jaguar Land Rover experience what it feels like to be in brutal competition. Let Darwinism work. Let those companies find the technological solutions, and as a result of that, they'll be generically fit. They'll be capable of taking that technology back out to the rest of the world. So when the tariff barriers come down again, our companies will be capable of fighting with the Chinese and have competitive technologies, but those that are sat behind tariff walls will not be. And it's my honest belief that ultimately, whilst we don't call it capitalism, I call it Darwinism, but it's that Darwinism that creates the fittest and the survival of the fittest. And right now, the fittest in the industry are the Chinese. That's a fact.
Yeah. Only one mention. Many European manufacturers, and most probably Americans also, are claiming that the Chinese made so huge progress because they were heavily subsidized by the Chinese government. I don't know if it's true or not.
It's true.
You said they made huge profits and so on. Okay, they are asking the same thing because I don't see the European companies being able to invest so much as to become competitive with China.
And I completely agree. And therefore, whilst I dislike tariff, I have no objections to grants and incentives. I think I talk about a capitalistic world, but I sincerely believe that you have to have a Keynesian environment during this change. I sincerely believe that government, learning institutions and companies need to work together. I sincerely believe, for example, you can't win in EVs if you don't have a prolific charging network. I don't think it's possible for charging companies to make money in the early days. Therefore, I think you need support. So I think it's not the car companies alone. I think that the governments have to decide, is a car companies important? The knee-jerk reaction is not one of tariff. The knee-jerk reaction is one of support. And that support comes in both moral support and in fiscal support. So I think it's perfectly reasonable that Renault, for example, lean upon the French government. I think it's perfectly, I'm sure you're doing it, but I think Dacia needs to be leaning upon the Romanian government. So it's perfectly reasonable that you look for state aid, but don't look for a shield. The way to get fit is to fight.
Okay, now it's your turn. I know it's very hot. That's the maximum aircon we can get tonight. Therefore, we can have some. Philip?
Okay, I have two questions. The first one, if hypothetically you were the CEO of Nissan, you were appointed as CEO of Nissan, what would be the measures you will do to save Nissan, in your perspective? What will you do? Tomorrow you are the CEO of Nissan. How would you save this company?
I was asked that in a different way, exactly that question, which would you want to go back to be the CEO? This is before Ivan was appointed. Would you like to go back as the head of Nissan? In my heart, I very much would say yes, because I love Nissan. But in my brain, I think it's the hardest job in the industry. I genuinely think it's tough. Because, as I said, there's not an obvious route to save. The answer to the question is you've got to put in place products that people want, and they don't have products that people want. So you probably got to focus your activities. You can't pursue every segment, but the segments that you pursue need to be the right one. So that maybe you, for example, you give up on Infinity. You've lost that position, but maybe you concentrate on small, affordable cars. The two things that Nissan are really good at and are still good at, they still have great technology. So you've got to leverage the engineers, and they've got the best manufacturing capability in the world. So in terms of our ability to make product efficiently and at good quality. And so I think what you have to do is try to leverage that. The problem is the money. Somewhere you've got to create, forgive me the pun, but somewhere you've got to create a cash cow or a cash kai. because you've got to have something that generates the ability to invest. And that's the problem. Once you get out of that cycle of investment, it's really difficult to get back into it. So it's going to take a lot of brave pills. As I say, I think Ivan has got, for me, the hardest job in our industry. He's got to cut costs. He's got to cut them in the right place. It's become a largely Japanese company, so he's got to cut jobs in Japan, which is really, really hard. It's going to be really unpopular. But he's got to do that, otherwise the company won't survive. Or as I say, basically he sells it.
And my second question would be regarding the big competition between European car manufacturers and the Chinese ones. Do you think the competition is, I don't know, is correct? Because as we all know, the Chinese manufacturers are subsidized by Chinese government.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like to make a parallel with a boxing match. It's like putting a man with 70 kilos fight a man with 100 kilos. They're not the same category.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a fair competition?
No, the difference is that they're 250 kilos and we're 70 kilos. No, it's not fair. Life's not fair. Unfortunately, right? So what I would say is, let's change the analogy of the boxing match. Let's take the analogy of judo. Judo, as you know, is the small guy can fight the big guy, or the small girl can fight the big man, because you use the weight of the opposition. And it's my belief that we have to. This is controversial, but it's my belief that you have to collaborate with the Chinese. So my view is, if you think back 15 years, the Chinese, when those central planners were saying, we can't be a force in automotive unless we collaborate with Western manufacturers, read, copy Western manufacturers, right? So they went into collaboration mode. They said it's okay to come into our market, but you have to come in 50-50. It's okay to come into our market, but you have to create a Chinese brand. It's okay to come into our market, but you have to bring technology. We have to do the same. We have to acknowledge that we're behind. We have to acknowledge we're not as good as they are at making batteries. And we have to invite them back in. Now, in the geopolitical sensitivities of, Taiwan and China and all of that, I know it's difficult, but my great hope and belief is that trade will always trump war. And so that if you're trading partners where it's economically unviable to go to war, that you won't go to war, that's a better solution. It's a better solution for humanity, but it's also a better solution for our indigenous car companies. So I really hope that, for example, Renault can make its collaboration with its Chinese partner work well, and I believe that there are others. There are some really good symbols, Leap, MG, already giving you some ideas about what can be done. And whilst I'm not advocating necessarily doing it exactly the same way as the Japanese did, there is something to be learned from the Japanese and the Korean examples that I think we should embrace. And to start embracing it, you've got to recognize the as-is situation, and the as-is the Chinese have got a 10-year advantage in making batteries over us, and we need to catch that back.
So I have also a question regarding to what Colleen has said earlier, as in a lot of brands came under Toyota. Do you see with a lot of brands popping up in China, and most of them probably will not survive, do you see this happening with BYD, as in they're building a massive factory now, which is apparently 10 times bigger than Tesla's? Do they have the possibility of taking a lot of these small brands and becoming like an umbrella for them as a Chinese market and being this leader that they are now?
I suppose it's one scenario. I think the more likely scenario is what I find with working with the Chinese is they're much more brutal than the Japanese. Japanese are much more sensitive to not losing face.
Yeah.
I find it strange, isn't it, for a country that we consider to be communist. In reality, it's simply it's a one-state, a one-party state, and you see, in many respects, a more brutalism, more Darwinism type environment. I think a lot of Chinese brands will go bankrupt. I think as a result there'll be a handful that will ultimately survive. For sure, BYD, Geely, SAIC are going to be amongst them. But what I think they will do, and you already have indications of it, is if they're going to start collecting brands, they'll start collecting Western brands. Because I think, certainly my experience of, and forgive me if I talk out of turn with any, but the Chinese have mastered technology quickly. They've got some amazing manufacturing capabilities. It's the only time in my life I've ever been to a factory, I won't say which one it was, but the lights off. Basically the whole factory ran basically on robots and a very small maintenance crew. So the manufacturing technology is there, but where they're not particularly good is brand and marketing. And so the fastest way, and MG is a really good example of taking a brand, positioning it as if it was a British brand, when, as we know, it doesn't have very much to do with being in Britain, but you market it in a way. So brand management, I think, is something that you'll see, and I can imagine that some of the Western brands might well be something that could be acquired. But I think in China they'll it'll be dog eat dog.
Any other questions? Dragoș?
No, so I have actually two questions. So first one is about Toyota. They've been very successful in the last few years with hybrids, but from what we can see, they are not ready for the EV era.
Yeah.
What do you know about that? What's your opinion on that? And I will also ask the second question.
I was a Toyota guy that just dropped the
And the second question is, I'm a true believer that the EV is the future. Not everybody is agreeing with that, but I think there is no question about that. Where do you see the electric car in 10, 15 years in terms of technology? Because you are an engineer. Battery, charging, range, technology. Thank you.
So Toyota made a mistake. My hypothesis, Nissan and Toyota have fought for years. They hate each other more than they hate anybody else. Nissan was the first to introduce hybrid, a car called the Tino. It's a terrible car, by the way. But it was a little MPV, and they only put the technology in Japan, and as often with Nissan, they didn't industrialize it properly. And Toyota came with the Prius, and the Prius kicked everybody's ass. My countermeasure to that was, let's not follow Toyota, let's leapfrog and go in a different direction, which is why the Leaf was created as a BEV. Honda tried to follow Toyota, they created the Insight, and as you know, it wasn't very successful. I think in Nissan going to battery electric, it was impossible for Toyota to say we follow Nissan. And so, whilst they might intellectually have come to a conclusion that EV might be the right answer, from a face point of view, they couldn't go that direction. So they basically went down, we'll make the hybrid, and a masterful piece of marketing with the self-charging hybrid. I don't know whether they call it that here. A dreadful description of an old technology. But they went hydrogen. And Toyota-san went all in on hydrogen. And when your president and the guy with the name over the company says we're going hydrogen, it's very difficult for anybody to contradict that, because your boss is your boss and you put him on a pedestal and you follow his orders. And so Toyota was really, really late in coming to the conclusion that they backed the wrong horse. And it's only really in the last 1 year that you've seen an acknowledgement that they have to move towards electrification. They've said that they won't go to hydrogen, at least in passenger vehicle space, but they might go in else. That's just face saving. I mean, hydrogen has never been a solution in reality for mass production. So I think Toyota are big enough that they can come back, but they were very late, and it hurts them to have to follow. I think they can follow now because Nissan is nowhere, but that's my interpretation of the rationale that was going on in the brains of the product planners. Is you have to be different from Nissan. The hydrogen is a better solution because you don't get the range issues. But you know, as an engineer, hydrogen is a crazy solution because thermodynamically it's just inefficient. Which brings me to your second point. First of all, yes, I'm wedded to electric vehicles, so obviously I believe in electric vehicles, but I'm not moribund by it. I'm not saying, I'm a great believer in competition. I'm a great believer, as you hear, in Darwinism, that you have to allow engineers and scientists to innovate. So I welcome the hybrid, the plug-in hybrid, the combustion of hydrogen, the fuel cell, whatever else is out there. I welcome it because I think the industry needs it. I think engineers need competition. So I disagree strongly with, for example, my own government, which says you will be EV by 2035. I think you've got to say, I will be net zero by 2035, but you never instruct a bunch of engineers on what technology they use. Otherwise they fail to innovate. So I think it's okay to have alternative technologies, and I think we should have alternative technologies. And I think synthetic fuels might be one of the technologies that finds its way into the future, but particularly for aerospace, maybe for cars like Ferrari or Aston Martin, for example. But I also do believe that the future is predominantly EV. And I think there are really two impediments to the natural rollout of EVs today. The first impediment is that the cars are too expensive. So you've got to have at least parity. You know, we have a pricing structure because that's what the customer is prepared to pay. And I listen to all of these pundits saying that EVs are not successful because you're not getting the market penetration. Well, you're not getting the market penetration because the price is too high. And as you know, you're in this industry, you know that the supply and demand curves, the elasticity of pricing is almost completely predictable. So if you bring the price of the EVs down, you'll sell more. Some impediments around range, but you'll sell more. The only way that you can really bring down the price of electric cars is two. One is time, which is basically volume, and the second is the size of the battery. And the only way that you can make, but the battery represents 40% of the cost of the car. If you can take particularly city cars with smaller batteries, then you can make them more affordable. But you can't do that without a prolific rollout of charging infrastructure. The customers won't accept it. And so to my earlier point, one of the areas where you need a Keynesian relationship with your government is in the charging infrastructure. You've simply got to put chargers into the ground in order that they're everywhere and people are confident in the range of their vehicles. So solution number one is parity of price driven by a prolific charging infrastructure that allows you to have smaller batteries. Impediment number two is the running cost. So today it's cheaper to run an EV than it is a gasoline, but it's not a material change. To me, you've got to create a material difference in the price of running the car. And I think for that to happen, you've got to change your approach to energy. Energy, electricity, energy needs to be democratized and it needs to be decentralized. You've got to think of an EV as part of the energy infrastructure, and you've got to imagine a future where every roof in your city has solar panel, every home has a home battery, every car is capable of basically V2G. And as a result, you've got to get into the thinking that you run your car for free. In other words, for example, you charge your home battery at 7 cents a kilowatt hour overnight. You charge your car, you sell the electricity back to the grid, either generated by solar or generated in your battery. You sell it back at 70 cents per kilowatt hour. The result of that is that your trading of your electricity, which is now decentralized and democratized, allows you to run your electric car for free. Now, I know that there are limitations in electric cars. You can't go as far as you want. Maybe you don't get the emotion from the sound. But if you seriously, can you imagine that people wouldn't accept a proposition where you had a car which cost the same as an internal combustion engine, was zero CO2, was a nice style, drove nicely, and cost you nothing to run? There might be some dinosaurs left, but the vast majority of us are going to see the value proposition. So I leave the 20% for synthetic fuel, but the 80% is going to go along with the economic rationale, which is it doesn't cost you any more to drive to buy an electric car. They're pretty darn good to run, and they cost you nothing to drive. And I'm saving the planet. What's not to like in that proposition? But for that to happen, again, I come back to a Keynesian relationship with your government. You've got to change the way that you sell power. And that means that you're going to have resistance from the EDFs of the world and the Eons of the world and the petrochemical companies, which are all very powerful lobby groups. But the reality, the technical reality is we have batteries and you can't uninvent them. We have cheap solar panels and you can't uninvent them. And so ultimately consumer is going to demand country by country the ability to trade and flex that electricity. Once that starts to happen, you get towards that democratization of electricity supply. Once you get that to happen, you can run your electric car for nothing. And I think that for me is a much more powerful argument than saying to the consumer, you must take an electric car because it's bad for them, because it's good for the planet. Because no, I won't say no one cares, but perhaps only 20% of the population really cares about the planet. What 80% of the population does care about is the money in their pocket. And so you have to change it from a climate change issue to an economic issue to change people's behavior.
So I would say we are all tired. At least I see a lot of tired faces. If there is only one last question, we go for it. Robert is the last one question, guys. Thank you.
Okay, I have to put the hard question. Is Tesla
I mean, the ones before weren't hard.
Is Tesla still relevant
That's a hard one.
in the game?
That's a hard one.
So it's an interesting question. It was one I was asked today, actually. I think it's a little bit like the Nissan question. There are moments in time where you come to a junction in the road and you go left or you go right. Tesla, I suppose, arguably, I hope we don't have anybody from Tesla in the room. Tesla has two dilemmas right now. Dilemma one is they have a really aging lineup. If you think about the Model S, it's been around for a long time. And whilst its powertrain and its software is continuously updated, the form factor hasn't really changed. Some minor changes, some of the plastics. I don't think you can run a global car company with 4 or 5 cars in your product range. You know, Nissan has 70 cars in its range. So I think if you want to be relevant, you have to have a portfolio of cars, and you have to do a better job than Cybertruck, because Cybertruck is a lousy car. Seriously.
But you can sell the software.
You can sell the software. You can find all sorts of other models. But the Cybertruck, as you know, won't meet European legislation. So you can't sell it here.
No.
The panels will fall off because you didn't glue them properly.
But in terms of software, they are
Software
the
is-
leader of the market.
The Chinese might be there as well, honestly speaking. So I think Tesla has proven, and Elon has proven, he has the capability to fix that. He's an amazing bloke. And I think, but I think you have to say, you have to have model changes. You have to you can't continuously rest upon your laurels. You can't have one body form factor, the S for example. I think it's been in the market for 12 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell me another car company that has a model that's been in the market for 12 years and hasn't changed it. You'll come from car companies. You wouldn't do it.
For a day.
Right. by the way, when I inherited Aston Martin, it had been in the market for 13 years. But that aside, but I think Elon can solve that. That he has the cash. Change the model line up, introduce some new model lines up, use the innovation that you have from something like Cybertruck, but find a better way of delivering it. The other is Elon himself. Elon is distracted. And that in itself is probably having an impact on the first problem. And of course it also he is the brand. So, whether you like his politics or not, I'm not a politician, but it is having an impact on people's propensity to buy Teslas. And I think he or his directors have to make a decision. Is Elon staying in the car business, or is he going on to bigger and other things? Does he need to appoint another CEO in his place to take over that? Well, he goes and plays politics or puts us on Mars, or does he come back to basically look after his car company? I think that's a personal decision. But either way, I think the future of Tesla sits in the hands of Elon Musk. And it can be extraordinarily successful, or it can be the biggest failure in history.
So, I will propose you to give a big round of applause to Andy. So I think I kept my promise to deliver you a very spectacular session. Thank you. I guess your applause are showing this. As you know me since many years, I'm usually not taking any conclusions at the end, because I like to leave you the privilege to have your own conclusions after such a fantastic discussion. Not because I cannot, I can very well, as you all know, but I strongly believe that it's better that you can try to keep from what he said to all of us what is relevant to you. Go deep into what he said, because there are many things he said which are really worth to explore even more. If you have eventually other big questions, here I am. I can try to ask Andy to deliver also on a later stage some answers. And thank you very much, Andy. You flew from London here tomorrow morning. He is going away from this hotel at 6 o'clock in the morning to go back. Thursday he's going to the House of Lords to discuss exactly what he said, how to advise the government what to do. So, you see, even UK is trying to do, is trying to change, is trying to follow. However, they are doing much, much, much better than Romania in terms of electrification. That's a fact. I saw the figures today. Don't look to the figures because you become angry about the Romania results. Again, look at It's the last one in all Europe. It's the last one with minus 31%. It's the only one with such a disaster. All the others, for the record, Romania is minus 31 for January, February in terms of BEVs, and the rest of Europe, including UK, including Norway, including whatever, all of them, it's plus 33%. Huh? It's a good one, huh? Romania, I mean, is doing well. So, you know me, I'm suffering a lot because, and he knows also that I'm not successful like we try to change the government together with Galei.
But maybe we can ask Andy to help us to an extra consultant for the Romanian government. No, I'm joking, but it's true.
I'm sure I alienated more than 50% of my audience, so I think I'd be a very unsuccessful politician.
No, Vincent, thank you very much. I wish you a wonderful night. Thank you for coming. Hopefully you will be able tomorrow morning to go back to the work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.